Oliver, good to see you, brother.
Oh, so good to see you, see all of your glowing faces here, and it just makes me miss you even more, seeing you now, just being in this place, because I know just getting to know you over these years and knowing how much you put into creating, what not only feels like landing pads, right, for all the extraterrestrials to come down and bring down their wisdom to us, but even more than just our star brothers and sisters up there, you create such incredible portals for people to come through and share their wisdom, to share not only their wisdom, but who they are and the energies and the frequencies that they carry. And that is so needed right now. So thank you. And thank you to all the other beautiful holders of this. It is a conference, but really it's a council, right? You're opening up this beautiful light council to so many people right now. And I really, really appreciate it. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, brother. And the feeling is mutual, brother. And I'm just excited for you to be contributing. When we decided to do this event, you were one of the first people I thought of because of everything that you've shared with me. And we're excited to receive your transmission today. So it's all yours. We're ready to go.
Oh, thank you very much. There's something, it just feels like what Mary Magdalene is offering to the collective is this calling, right? It's sometimes when you are in communion or you're in connection with higher dimensional energies or deeper realm energies, or we're feeling various masters, right, from different times and spaces and timelines and dimensions, there's always this kind of echo or this whisper that you can hear, right? You can't really hear it with your ears, but it's a type of whisper that you have to really attune your spirit to. And right now it feels like not only is Mary Magdalene whispering to the collective, she is roaring to the collective, right? She's speaking the word, right? These lost gospels, and we're all kind of feeling that. We're all receiving this. And so if all of you, wherever you are in the world right now, whether you're watching live and holding space with us right now, or you're going to watch the recording later, you're receiving this call. You're hearing the voice of the Magdalene in one way or another. You're feeling that. That's why you've been magnetized here. That's why you are present here with all of us. And she's inviting you, right? It's this beautiful invitation that she issues, this key of light that turns, right? That lock in your heart that just opens your spirit. She's calling you into that mystery. She's calling you to dissolve and to expand so infinitely into the mystery that she is. And I love thinking about Mary Magdalene as this mystery, because I think one of the best things you can do as someone who's on the path of a seeker, especially if you're looking to deepen your connection to Mary Magdalene, if you're looking to get to know her on ever deepening and higher levels, is just to receive as many sources about her as you can. Of course, using your discernment, keeping that there. But one of the best parts about this mystery that is Mary Magdalene, and in many ways the Magdalene lineage and the lineage of the Marys, which we'll talk about tonight, is that so many people, as we've been sharing about, on this conference, so many people hold pieces, right? Shards and fragments of her light, burning embers that are there ready to set us ablaze. And so there are so many different perspectives. There's so many ways of singing and telling her story that it's beautiful to receive as many perspectives, as many of these stories, and many of these teachings and histories as you can, because Mary Magdalene, as the Gnostics would say, appears to you by what you carry in your heart, which means the only truth, right? If there could be a truth about Mary, the only truth is the truth that you'll find within inside yourself. It's the truth that you'll receive in your heart in connection with her. So as you receive from all these different speakers, as you read all these incredible books, as you watch YouTube videos, as you go on retreats around the world in honor of the Mary, there's something about when truth reaches you, it wakes you up. You feel it, right? That tingles, that flow through your body, that instant recognition, like this is the truth. And the more you align yourself, you attune yourself, right? You're kind of like a compass, finding which way is truth leading me. She's going to take you on a beautiful journey, and you're going to find your truth that feels right to you. And that to me is the best way as an intention for all of us to have with Mary Magdalene. It's not about what her true story is, her true history, all of that. We're in the mystery, and you will find your truth. And that's where I feel Mary Magdalene really comes to us. That's where I feel like ourselves are prepared to receive the deepest parts of who and what Mary Magdalene is. So thank you all for allowing me the great honor to be with you tonight, because my name is Oliver, and I've, over the past 2 decades, been deepening my connection, right? First to Allah, which is the Aramaic word for God, Aramaic, the language that Yeshua and many of the Essenes spoke. Deepening my connection to our dear brother Yeshua, to the stories of Maria Magdalita, which is Mary Magdalene's Aramaic name. And I consider myself a historian and a sacred site tour guide. Yes, I do all that. But the title, I guess, that, or how I view myself that feels the most authentic, is a storyteller. I love to tell the stories, because for me, when we look at all the ancient mystery traditions, it is through the stories that we can maybe glimpse the truth, right? It helps us open not just our minds, but our entire spirits to receive and be imparted with deeper wisdom. And this is why I love telling stories, because it bypasses, right, the intellectual guards that we have in place saying, oh, that's not right, that's not true, that's not this, that's not that. We can all get lost in the stories. And this is one of the ways that when you tune into the story of Mary Magdalene and many of these early biblical figures, their likeness, their essence, their frequency is always communicated in stories. I mean, the very Bible itself, you could say, is the beautiful story from different sources, fragmented over the centuries, of course, but it is a story about light. It is the story of the light and how the light is returning now, and how that light which is returning through all of us. And are we ready? Are we ready to receive it? Are we being prepared in our fields to receive this light? And so to open today, because a lot of my work is also about the language of Aramaic and teaching people maybe a more accurate version of the Bible, maybe closer to the words that many of these masters would speak. I was always captivated and interested in an Aramaic word, which is the word that Jesus would speak before he would perform some of his healings or his miracles on people. The word that he would speak is the Aramaic word eighth batak. Eighth batak. So why don't you take a moment and just sound that out? Say this word a few times just in your own space and see, what does it feel like to receive this word? Eighth batak. Eighth batak. Eighth batak. And when we translate that word, when we go back to the Hebraic roots of eighth batak, you could say, yes, on the surface it means to open, but really what this word is communicating is to be open. To be opened by the light, to be opened by Allah, God. And not just to be opened, but to become a vessel, to become a conduit, to allow that light of God to flow in and through us. This is why Yeshua would remind people about eighth batak, especially when we needed healing, when we needed to be returned to our divine blueprint or wholeness. This was what we find in eighth batak. And may we all be open, not just for some of the things that I'm excited to share with you tonight, but for all the speakers and really to the Magdalene essence herself. May we be open and may we be opened in her presence. So one of the things that I love doing is bringing people on retreats to many sacred sites around the world. And for about the past 8 years, the place in which I've been most called is to the Isles of Britain, and especially exploring the ancient British mysteries, literally millennia of history going back to the Druids and before them, but really starting to see why these lands were such a fertile foundation for the early seeds of light in Christianity. In fact, the first above ground church anywhere in the world was here in the British Isles. That is one of the lost histories that very few people know about or talk about. But why? Why these lands? Why did Joseph of Arimathea bring the Grail and many of the disciples and some of the members of the Holy Family? Why do all the stories say they were brought back to these lands? And that is an interesting and fascinating mystery that not only have I dedicated my life to helping to tell that story, but to bring people in to that mystery so that you can walk these lands, reconnect to these lost histories, these lost stories with some of the most luminous figures I've ever encountered historically took place in those first few centuries in ancient Britain. And so I'm actually, even though I live in Wales, which is such an incredible, special place, I'm in Glastonbury right now, in the heart of what's known as Avalon. So I'm sending all of you those Avalonian energies right now. For those of you that have been to Glastonbury, in the UK, you know how special it is. And if you haven't been to Avalon, and you are on the quest to both understand the Sophionic dissension teachings of Mary Magdalene and perhaps the origins and foundations of Christianity, some of the oldest we have on record, you must make a pilgrimage to these lands because they are so important, because these stories are woven here. As you walk barefoot on these grounds, not only do you receive these stories, but you can still feel the footsteps that they say Yeshua, Mary Magdalene, and many of the Holy Family members walked these lands. And you feel that as you walk them. And so I've been down here for the past 2 weeks, just leading groups, taking them on journeys to these places that have these Christed foundations, historically woven into the story of the blooming of what was Christianity before it was ever Christianity, right? The religion before it was the religion. It was the way of being. It was how we can achieve that Christed light inside ourselves. This was the basis of what was the Celtic Church. And so I was just thinking about how the other day I was bringing a group into a place called the Glastonbury Abbey, which is this incredible ruins of an ancient church. The foundations of this church date back to year 62. Think about that for a minute. 62, right? This was some of the oldest recorded foundational structures we have in Christianity. And one of the buildings we were taking a tour through is known as the Lady Chapel. Right? And so when you come into the presence or you enter into a lady chapel in a church, I had one of my retreat guests, they asked me, tell us about the lady chapel. Like, what does the lady represent? And so when we receive the transmissions that you find in a lady chapel, there's different layers that we can open up. Because on the surface, you would say it's dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And of course, there's a lot in there you can unpack. Like, was she a virgin? What does blessed mean in Aramaic? There's such a richness that you can explore. But what's interesting is beyond just being dedicated to Mother Mary, the lady chapels are dedicated to the Marys. To the Marys. Now, this is an interesting term because for me, if I ever want to really understand who a biblical historical figure is, you have to go to their names. And very quickly, what you realize when you start to unpack their names in ancient Greek or ancient Aramaic is they're not actually names, they're titles. They are titles of who and what they were. They were mantles that they would wear, bestowed to them for certain qualities that they had embodied in who they were. And so if you start to decode their names and open up their names, and especially one of my specialties is opening them up Aramaically, getting to see what their Aramaic names were and what were the roots of those Aramaic names, then you start to meet these beautiful figures, perhaps in a way we don't often get to see, or perhaps in a way most don't get to look. And so the Marys, right? These were the women that the lady chapels were dedicated to. And it was so important that the first step that I always like to do with my groups before we enter into the lady chapels is to feel into who the Marys were, to all of the women throughout all the ages who would bear the title Mary, all of them worthy of bearing that title, all of them ready to embody what the Mary represented. And this is one of the things when you go back in time in Christianity, you have to look at the church that was before the church. There was a title for this church. It was called the Mother Church. It was the first church, and this was the church of Celtic Christianity. And so when we look at what was the difference between Celtic Christianity and the Roman Christianity that we know of today, that's the dominant force in the Christian perspective. Because even when we talk about Christianity, for many people, it can be a bit of a trigger, right? You feel that resistance, that space in you that doesn't want to open to something that has betrayed our trust for thousands of years. It's because it's different than what it originally was. And it's lost that aspect of what the Marys held. It was the feminine light that was held within the teachings of the Christ, because when we look back in time, the Christed light and the transmission of the Christ was always something that was present and seen in two streams. The Christed light was broken up into two pillars, if you will. One was the Christ of the Logos, which our brother Yeshua represented, the masculine light of the Christ. And then there was the Christ of the Sophia, the feminine light, the light that was embodied by Mary Magdalene and the Marys. This was one of the greatest tragedies that has ever taken place in history, is that the Roman Church sought to remove this feminine light principle from the story of the Christ and made the Christ just Jesus when it was Jesus and Mary Magdalene, or really what they represented, the light that moved through them. And so the Marys were the group of women that held this light principle. And when we feel into the history, such great tragedies were committed against the Marys, both their physical bodies, against their physical bodies, but against the teachings. It's very hard for me when I go into the lady chapels and really connect in to this essence, not to shed tears, because yes, they are tears for the great tragedy and the pain and the suffering that was inflicted upon the Marys and the degradation of this feminine light. But as you breathe through that feeling, at least for me, it's always that these tears are actually tears of hope. Because as hard as they tried, all the different forces, all the different people that tried to suppress this light, they failed. And this light is returning. And there's such beautiful stories from the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the desert, the disciples and many of the early followers of Christ that were under such horrible persecution had to go out into the deserts and essentially hide into the caves to preserve these teachings and keep this light alive. And many of the teachings that came out of these grandmothers and grandfathers' deserts were more like prophecies, because they knew what was happening. They could see what was happening. But even though they were under such horrible pressure, pain, and persecution, they remained hopeful. And some of the stories, they would describe this feminine light like an ember, right? Think of it like you're at a bonfire and the fire goes out, but you still have some of the embers. And even if the ember is just tiny, barely a glow, all you have to do, you blow on it and it starts to light up, get hotter and hotter and hotter until that small ember can bring back that bonfire that was lost. And I love that description from the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the desert, because it's exactly what's happening now. We are all starting to find these lost embers that have been tried to be buried and extinguished, water poured on them, everything that they could do to extinguish this flame, this fire, and these embers. None of it worked, because now we're all finding our embers and blowing on them, and this luminosity, this great return of the light is coming back. And I love that too, because even the analogy, how they'd use, they would blow on the embers. When you translate the word breath in Aramaic, which is ruka, it also means spirit. Now, how beautiful is that? The Aramaic word for breath and spirit is the same word. Breath and spirit were linked. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. I wish we had more time, but there's such medicine, really, when you start to open up Aramaic words. Even the idea of the Holy Spirit, rukat the kutsha in Aramaic, can be translated as the Holy Spirit or holy breath. This is one of the reasons why we see so many beautiful stories of Jesus breathing on people, or the Holy Spirit being breathed on people. There's richness in there that can be found, but I digress. Back to the story of the Marys and this ember of light. And when we think about these Marys, this is how we give tribute and honor to them. Our gratitude of spirit for all that they did, for this returning of the feminine light. Because when people kind of ask, what is the difference between this kind of Christed masculine light and the Christed feminine light? Well, very often it's the idea, especially in Aramaic, when you engender a word feminine, doesn't mean man, woman. It's talking about something from being a thing or a noun into an experience. And so when we talk about the light of the Christ, of the Logos, the light that Yeshua, that Jesus carried, that's the masculine light, right? It's the light that you can see with the eyes, right? The expression of light into the world. But the light that the Marys carried, the feminine light, this is light that you can't see with your eyes. And many try, but you can't see it. It's the light that can only be felt with the Spirit. This is the light that only those who are prepared and ready to receive it can perceive it. And so when we go back and we actually look in time at different forms of Christian art, or really Christian symbols that we see pop up in the art, and that's another great area if you're looking for the teachings of certain beings or saints or anyone that carries with them art that shows and depicts symbols. You look at the symbols and you can parse out and extrapolate out vast wisdom and knowledge about these people or the teachings that they carry. And so when we look back in early Christian art, you are familiar with the idea of the halo, right? We often see saintly figures, holy men and women, bestowing and wearing the halo above their head. But there was a symbol that came before the halo, and that symbol was the image of a flame, a fire that burned above their heads. And so when you look at some of these early art depicting these holy men and women with the flame above their head, you'd often see people in the same art, right? In the same image, people gathered around these holy men and women. And when you look at these men and women who are gathered around them, some of them would have the flame above their head, but not all of them would. And so this is one of the first layers of teachings when it came to the transmission of these forms of light, especially the feminine light principle, is that this light is given to all. This light is denied to no one. But you can only receive this light if you can receive this light. Only if you're ready to bring that light in and let it consume you. You are set ablaze with this holy fire. And so the Marys were the embodiments of this feminine light principle. They were the keepers of this sacred flame of the Christed light that would come down and in, right? This was the Sophionic descent of the dove. This was the Sophionic process of descension. We focus so often in kind of the spiritual communities around the world about ascension, right? Going up, going out, connecting to Allah and the Malkuta de Allah, the kingdom of God, which is important. It's a big part of the process. But when we see the teachings and we receive and feel the teachings of the Marys, this was the descension process. This was the dove or the dragon, depending on which culture you're looking at it from, coming down and within you, anchoring and embodying these teachings. And I love understanding all these principles around light. Even the Essenes, which was very fascinating, the way they'd kind of describe humanity, right? The collective idea of humanity is they would liken humanity to a word in Aramaic, nura, which is really like the light of the moon, right? So kind of God, Allah, divine was the sun. And so humanity and humans were kind of similar to the light of the moon. And when we think of the light of the moon doesn't shine her own light. The moon reflects the light of Allah, of God, of the divine. And so the Essenes would structure their entire communities around this principle, where through Nura, I have a responsibility to all of you, right? If I was a member of the Essene community, I have a divine responsibility to all the people in that community to help polish and refine them so they become as reflective to divine light as possible, to cultivate their own Nura. And all of you out there would have a responsibility to me, to help me become as reflective and luminous in that divine light as possible. Because what happens when you're in a community, or what happens in your own field, when you cultivate this Nura, when you cultivate this light, you overcome the forces of Satana. The Aramaic word, you overcome Satana. Now, what does Satana sound like? It sounds like Satan. That's literally where the understanding of the word Satan came out of. But Satan in Aramaic does not mean this kind of red lizard guy who lives in the flames of hell. Satana translates as the force that causes us to forget, or the force that causes us to become divided. And so part of the principles and the teachings of both the Essenes, but absolutely within the Marys, as they would learn to transmit this form of light, is to help people become less divided in themselves and to help people remember. And so this flame that was above their head would spread and be shared. And immediately after the crucifixion, even though my focus and my life's destiny is about the story of Joseph and the people who went with Joseph of Arimathea, as you've heard from the previous speaker, and I'm sure many more speakers around Mary Magdalene, where this light went was many places around the world. That flame was kept and delivered and brought to many different places in the world, from the shores of Britain all the way to India and beyond. You can follow these flames, you can follow these clues, you can follow the lore and the legends as deeply as your heart wants to take. And people often ask me kind of, where do I base what I consider truth on? Well, truth is a big word, but how I kind of look at my lensing or my perspective when I study, especially from the historian side, is I break it up kind of into 4 quadrants. I have the bottom, which is history, right? Established historical fact. Then I have scripture, and then I have lore or legend, and then my own intuitive channel. And you put those 4 things together, and that usually what I find not only helps me, but helps a lot of people. So you're still anchored in a grounded reality of history. But if you just stay there, you miss a lot. And that's why you need the scripture and the apocrypha text. And that's why you need the lore and the legends and the cultural folklore stories. And you need your own channel, and you bring that together and you find your truth. And it helps you align, again, that compass of what feels right and what doesn't. And where does your spirit send you? And where do you feel like you would just want to expand in these beautiful places? And so the Marys were such incredible women. The Mariams in Aramaic. And when we open up Mariam, you see even the seeds, the Ma, the Ra, and the These were the women who were embodied in that feminine light principle. And then you get to explore all the different women who were called Marys. And then you look at their secondary title. Like Mary Magdalene, people think she's this woman called Mary from Magdala. Maybe that's what that means. But in Aramaic, it means something very different. So you have Mariam, the woman who's so embodied in the feminine light principle. You have Magalit, but the ta at the end engenders that word feminine, which changes its context. Because oftentimes it gets translated as fortress or tower, which you can do on a kind of a surface level Hebraic roots. But when you start to open up the deeper roots, especially when you go into the individual Hebrew letters, you start to get a very rich story in there. Even one of my favorite Hebraic roots in Magalita is a tiered chest of drawers. I remember when I first read that, when I was translating it, I was like, that's weird. What does that mean? But think about this tiered chest of drawers that keep getting deeper or higher, if you will. It depends on which way you want to look at it. Where it just means the more you embody yourself and the more you align with this frequency of the Mary, of the women who embody these feminine light principles, the more you can access these deeper wisdom transmissions and truths within your own heart. It's like Mary standing right there at the doorway, but you have to find that path to her and open that door. And there she is, just waiting. And so these Marys and the Mariams have such important transmissions for the world now, as well, not just for women, but also this pathway for the masculine, which is so much of what I'm focusing a lot of my teachings on now, because I've done so much work with countless groups of women that I'm starting to also now call in groups of men to become the Grail keepers. Right, to understand the wisdom and the traditions of the Grail and those who keep the Grail, those who have been in honor of the Grail. And the Grail is such a beautiful symbol because it can mean so many different things. Is it just the cup, the physical object? Does it represent Mary Magdalene? Does it represent the feminine teachings of the Christ? All of the above. It's up to all of us to seek the Grail and to see what it means to us. But there were keepers of the Grail in history, men who understood the importance of these teachings, of the Mariams, of this light that would not be extinguished. And Joseph of Arimathea is one of the most beautiful examples of these Grail keepers. Joseph of Arimathea, whose title, one of the titles he bore, he was a man of many titles. One of the Greek titles was Paranymphos, the one who was dedicated to protecting the Marys. And more than just protecting, recognizing, seeing them, offering his very life and everything he had to the continuation of this feminine light. That was his role. Imagine that for a moment, just the great honor it must have been, where you were chosen to be guardian of some of the greatest treasures that have ever existed. Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, the Marys, these lineage and wisdom keepers of the Christed light. He was in full reverence and honor of them and protected them for the remainder of his life. And so we see this emergence of this Grail lineage, and all of the contemporary historians and the Apocrypha writings all say very clearly that after the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea brought the Grail. Members of the Holy Family, disciples, and even Mary Magdalene herself, they went to France, and from France they went to ancient Britain. which is where all the stories of the foundation of the first roots of Christianity, before it was Christianity, the roots of the mother church were anchored here in a land that was already prepared and ready to receive them. And it was here on these lands that Christianity flourished for centuries before Rome ever got its hands on it and changed some of the biggest and most important parts of this faith and of this way of being. And this is the story of Celtic Christianity. And through the story of Celtic Christianity, you come into contact with incredible figures, especially incredible women. A group of women called the Golden Women. These were the first female saints of Christianity, the first organized form of teaching the Christed way and faith anywhere in the world, under the instruction of both Mary Magdalene and Joseph of Arimathea. In fact, the head, you could say the head, as if there was a leader, it was a circle. But the originator of these golden women, this circle of 12 women, was Joseph of Arimathea's granddaughter. So this lineage that came through Joseph, both spiritually and his blood, created some of the most incredible figures of Christianity. I wish it would take me hours and hours. In fact, it takes me many, many weeks through many of the courses I teach online to unpack this story, because it's so rich and so exciting. But even Joseph Arimathea's grandson, Linus, was the first bishop of Rome. Imagine that. So you can see where all these unseen connections at the very dawn of Christianity were held by what I call where the dove met the raven, or the dove met the dragon. The royal, holy, Davidic, Yeshua-based, Mary Magdalene-based bloodline meeting the ancient Druid royal family bloodline and birthing this form of the Christed light that even today still exists on this land and still retains so much purity, especially when you come here and you walk the land and you feel it. It comes back. And so these great golden women carried this feminine light, taught and initiated through this feminine light, and there it spread, going out not only to all the islands in this area, up to Scotland, to Ireland, back into Europe, back into France, and spread from there. They created this unbroken lineage of teachings that nobody knows about, or at least no one traces it all the way back to its source. And that's where I feel so called, not just by Joseph of Arimathea, but just by this spirit of these emerald lands, that emerald ray meeting the golden ray of the Christ, right? This is such an important story. Such an important story. And it's the story that equally honors both Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, equally honoring that code of the masculine logos Christ and the Mariams. And so one of the things I want to leave you with, although I really wish I could have been here for longer, is that this story of the Marys has never ended. It continues. It continued in different parts of the world. It was woven into the land as seeds of light that will come back. And there was a form of the church before the awful church that was the Roman church that we know today. And I feel bad, I don't want to say awful, but far from aligned with the authentic teachings. And so if you're on this path of resurrecting the Magdalene that is inside yourself, you will find ways in which you can reestablish that covenant and find, even in the faith that is Christianity at its deepest and oldest roots, roots that are still vibrant and still pure. And you will find that pathway home back to that Magdalene heart. So thank you so much for tuning into this tradition, to this lost history, for these transmissions that are here, and for anyone that wants to continue these stories and learning about these lost traditions, especially with the Celtic Church and Joseph of Arimathea and many of these unsung heroes of the earliest form of Christianity. Then you can visit my website, thegnosticdruid.com. I have so many do-it-yourself courses you could take. I'm regularly teaching new courses. But the best thing that I recommend to anyone is, on this path to Mary Magdalene, allow her to magnetize you where you need to go, whether that's through books, through videos, through courses, or really to walk the places where you feel her feet once walked. Because the places that she walked still carry her codes, and they will still awaken those memories within you. So thank you so much for letting me share about this lost light tradition. And I hope all of you continue this beautiful journey back to the Magdalene heart.